Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you to the FP&A Trends Webinar. My name is Olga Rudakova, an FP&A professional, data storytelling trainer, and FP&A Trends ambassador. I will be your facilitator for the event. Our topic tonight is maximizing FP&A value through automation. And this has attracted over 500 attendees from 59 different countries. I can wait to hear our speakers for the event. Let me start by walking you through the agenda. Tonight, we are going to speak about FP&A value added through automation, using automation to drive value creation, reasons why companies seek automation, and main changes companies go through. We'll speak about finance automation to manifest the mission. We'll have conclusions, recommendations, and we'll certainly answer your questions at the very end. And now it is my pleasure and honor to introduce our speakers for the event. Start with you, Kevi. Please join me here on the webcam. Kevi Ijatame is a finance director at Google Cloud. Kevi is a finance and operations executive with over 17 years of experience working with technology and telecommunications companies. Kevi, we are very happy to have you with us tonight.
Super excited to be here, Olga. Thank you.
Now I will introduce our second speaker for the evening. Chris, please join me here on the webcam. Chris Light is the head of business operations at Causal. Chris leads finance, BizOps, and customer success at his company. Prior to joining Causal, Chris led finance and corporate development at a healthcare startup and held various different roles. Chris, thank you for joining tonight.
Thanks, Olga. Excited to be here.
Great. And we are moving to our third speaker for the evening. Brady Ellis is VP and Head of Finance at Branch Insurance. Brady is responsible for finance, accounting, reporting, and business intelligence at Branch Insurance. Before that, he began his career with Deloitte. Brady, we are pleased to have you with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Great, and now let me walk you through some introductory slides. And first of all, I want to introduce FP&A Trends Group as such. You certainly know that FP&A Trends offer you education, such as online resources, webinars, and workshops, like the one you're attending now. But we are more than that. We are international FP&A board, present in 27 cities and 16 countries. Beyond that, we are strategic advisory and research. So there is certainly worth exploring different facets of what we do. What we can expect tonight. Tonight, we will be having 1 hour webinar. We expect your active participation in 2 polls. We expect Q&A session. You can ask questions through Q&A box, so the chat box available here in this software. You can start right now. Presentation for this event is available in the handouts section, and you will receive the recording and the presentation after the meeting by email. When we finish, we will ask you to take part in the brief survey after the session, literally 30 seconds, and your feedback is very valuable to us. Now, I would like to thank our partner for the event. Causal is a business planning platform for finance and beyond. Causal, thank you for making this event possible. Let me start a bit by showing you some provocative information. Our FP&A Trends surveys throughout several years show one and the same results. Our FP&A teams not doing what they want to do. Most of our time is actually devoted to routine tasks that create low value. But what we want to focus instead is high value adding activities, such as generating insight, helping with decisions, and driving action. If you want to know what 2022 survey show, you can certainly do that at our webinar in July, and I will tell you about it a bit more at the end of this session. But what to do with the problem? How to free our hands to focus on more valuable tasks. Automation can help with that. But when we're thinking about automation, it actually creates more questions than answers. The first of all, we ask ourselves which technology to use, because there are various technologies available on the market and they differ in complexity and costs. We don't know where to start, which area in our FP&A process should be automated first. We don't know which skills we need to manage that. We don't know how our approach to automation should differ depending on the size of our organization or the industry we work in. Many of these questions we will attempt to answer at this webinar. And the first person to share his experience with us will be Kevi Ijatme. Kevi will be speaking about using automation to drive value creation. Kevi, this stage is yours.
Thank you, Olga. Thanks. So today I'll be talking about how we use automation to drive value creation, specifically as it relates to FP&A. I will start off looking at the case for FP&A automation. I'll talk about approaches that firms typically can think about as they go on this journey. And then to make it practical and real and, hopefully, energize some of those creative juices, I'll also share two of my experiences. So on the next slide, I will start off with the case for FP&A automation. At a macro level, the case for automation is pretty simple. It's predicated on how can we as FP&A professionals become better partners to the business. And then how do we reinvest the time that we save into solving the next big business challenge? And, emphasis on solving. Ultimately, as you think of this journey, as you embark on the journey, or, maybe you're in the middle of the journey, think through your digitization strategy has to be simple. I've spoken to a multitude of finance leaders as well as business executives, and one thing is super clear. There is an inherent need to move finance up the value chain. Business leaders want their finance partners sat in the driving seat with them as they go through some of the challenges that we face in business today. Currently, we generate about 2.5 quintillion bytes of data on a daily basis. Now, just the velocity of this data drives and brings its own challenges. Now more than ever, we want to understand the channels that we're going through to market, the geographical mix of our revenue. So all of that data brings complexity that automation can help reduce and drive. Business leaders want to make decisions faster. What new products should they launch? What solutions should they launch? And what new markets should we go into? And automation brings a bit of speed and also, drives agility in the decision-making process. Resilience, last but not least, we bearing the macroeconomic situations that we're in, digital transformation, COVID-19 brought its own challenges. And so as businesses think of how to become more resilient, automation really plays a facilitating role. On the next slide, I will talk about the approaches to automation. One thing that I will say is, approaches differ, I encourage firms and leaders to just stay the course. You know, I've worked at a firm that looked at automation as a low-hanging fruit. It was a cost-cutting exercise. And I've also worked at a firm who has taken a different approach to automation, you know, looking at it more as a transformative effort and really thinking of it more as a cultural transformation than a cost-cutting tool. And in my experience, the latter approach really drove more benefits for the organization. You know, but a couple of things that I would say is it really starts from the top. The tone needs to be set from the executive team, the lead of the finance organization, as well as a partnership with the business on the why for automation and the value that it brings to the organization. Automation as a concept is one that requires a significant amount of collaboration. You know, it requires, you know, I really think of it as a stool with 3 legs. It requires bringing in professionals from your, you know, your IT department. These are the folks who really understand the architectural landscape. They understand, you know, your extract, transform, and load capabilities. The second leg of that stool is really the data engineering organization. Now, different companies will call these functions different names. You know, but data engineering, you know, really understanding AI and ML capabilities, understanding the data warehousing, the data marts, as well as how that data can be really used to drive value. And then the third leg of the stool is the FP&A professional. They understand the challenges the business is trying to solve. They understand the questions that the business is asking. And this collaboration is really important for driving the best outcomes for an organization. I encourage folks to start from really identifying those high value activities. So with all this capacity that automation gives us, you know, what are we going to go do? Are we going to go play more in understanding revenue concentration? Are we going to be more operational and sit with our business partners? Are we going to, you know, really think through market or customer segmentation and really think of how to drive value in translating operational outcomes into the P&L? Last but not least is really think through a growth mindset within the organization. So as finance professionals get this free capacity, 10, 15, 20%, whatever that number is, what can they then fill up the time with? So a culture of learning is super important. But having said all of this, you know, I just want to reiterate, stay the course, whatever the outcome. I think the consistency is more important than what approach each firm uses. This will differ from firm to firm. On the next slide, I will talk about a practical example that, you know, I've worked through. So as you kind of think through your own journey, as you can imagine, revenue reporting for an organization 100 billion in revenue or over can get really complex. Now, we had a challenge in this example where revenue reporting was just very complex. The time to get the insights was about 3 to 4 weeks after the event had happened. This drove, you know, different outcomes for the business. So business leaders couldn't be agile. You know, we talked about agility, resilience was a bit low within the organization, and the decision making was pretty slow. And therefore, all of that impacts the competitive advantage of the organization. So what we did in this situation was we deployed some machine learning algorithms that automatically flagged anomalies within the data. We also implemented a natural language model. And for some of you who would already have been on this journey, you know, natural language doesn't always translate into human language. So we used a couple of off-the-shelf solutions, as well as some in-house developed solutions to really translate that natural language into human logic. And the outcome really is, or the outcome was, a finance professional getting not just reports, but analysis on the drivers of what has changed in revenue. The impact for the business was immeasurable. Business leaders were able to understand insights around revenue in 18 to 24 hours as opposed to 3 to 4 weeks. decisions could be made relatively quickly on tweaking operational performance or activities and seeing the outcomes come out through the P&L almost on a real-time basis. On the next slide, I will cover my second practical example, which is really translating around the forecasting. The challenge here was, the organization that I was in had a really low predictability on up margin projections. It was not accurate, and so finance didn't really have the credibility, and that seat at the table was a bit shaky. So what we did was, we defined the playing field. What do we want to achieve? Did a ton of process work in order to identify what processes were suboptimal around our forecasting. And then we built models using machine learning that in most cases outperformed the work of our finance professionals by about 80%. The outcome was operating margin projections that were 99.90% accurate, and almost real-time projections on the scenarios of the business. Thanks, Olga. That's me today.
Thank you, Kevin, for sharing your insights from quite a large organization. And now it's time for us to move on to the first polling question. And actually, what I would like to ask our audience is something related to where you have started. And let me ask you, which FP&A areas are automated in your organizations? And options are data entry and integration, reporting and dashboarding, forecasting and scenario modeling, all of the above or none of the above. So I'm really curious to see where do we stand in terms of automation, which areas are already automated. Data entry and integration, reporting and dashboarding, forecasting and scenario modeling, and either all of the above or none of the above. I see that most of you have already voted. So let me close this poll and let me share the results with you. So we have quite an interesting, reasonably even distribution. A winner with a slight margin is reporting and dashboarding. It looks like this area is automated in most of the organizations. Data entry and integration is the second one in the list, and then none of the above. So 25% of our attendees tonight don't have any areas automated yet, but it's good to be here. And 15% have all of these areas automated, amazing, and 4% have forecasting and scenario modeling covered. Katie, my question to you, are you surprised by the results, or it is something that you have expected?
Not necessarily. I think data entry, integration, reporting, and dashboard are really fundamental to some of the more advanced automation capabilities. It's interesting, I think, to see the outcomes here. And for the 25% who haven't really automated, I think it's just a great opportunity to start on the journey. But no, not necessarily a surprise for me. I think interesting also.
Good. Thank you for this comment. And it's time for us to actually move on to our short discussion related to this polling question. So please join me here on the webcam. And I would like to ask all of our panelists one and the same question. Which area should be automated first in FP&A, and how to make this decision? Let me start with you, Chris. What do you think? Where should we start?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we heard Kevin talk about and we saw in that poll was people have made the move towards reporting and dashboards, as well as some of on the data side of things. And your forecasting and the downstream insights that you can draw are only as good as the data that's going into all these systems and your automations. And so I think to start, it really makes sense to focus at the top of the stack, with the accounting, with your data sources, working with the business partners, making sure they're providing the data in a way in which you can then use it to drive action at the company.
Certainly makes sense. Thank you, Chris. What do you think, Brady? Where should we start and how to decide on it?
Yeah, my other encouragement would be, on top of getting great data and partnering with your data partners, your people in your IT teams, would be look for something that's going to be a high impact space, somewhere where you know the data is good, and it doesn't have to be broad. But selecting typically revenue is a great place to start, since we're pretty good at collecting revenue data generally. It's a lot of what drives a lot of our businesses. And so that's a great place to look around for, hey, do we have the data here we need? And how can we start to put it into a model, think about it more deeply across all three of those steps: data collection, dashboarding, and then forecasting and modeling.
Thank you. Thank you for this angle. And back to you, Kevin. What do you think? Which area should be automated first and how to decide on it?
So I'll reiterate some of the comments that my fellow panelists have made. I think that the automation, there is some skepticism sometimes within the organization towards automation. I encourage teams to think about showing wins early on. So, really identify areas that drive the most impact for the organization. Iterate, continue to learn, continue to iterate. So low-hanging fruits would also be something that I encourage as well.
Nice. Thank you for all of your answers. And we are moving on to Chris's presentation. Chris Light will be speaking about reasons why companies seek automation and the main changes companies go through. Chris, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Olga. Really appreciate it. Yeah, so I guess to start, the question is why automate? And so if we start there on the first slide, the reason of automation really, I mean, it probably goes without being said, everyone that's here on this webinar is here because they realize they want to automate. They realize we saw how people are spending their time and how they feel about how they're spending their time. They want to do more value add stuff. We all do. And candidly, as you think about at a macro level, the company wants everyone to be doing value add stuff. The finance team, the FP&A professionals are extremely valuable resources to a company. And if they're spending all their time copying and pasting CSVs, reformatting files, sending it out to a department head, then taking it back in and consolidating it, that's just a lot of manual work that with where technology is today, it's not the best use of your time, you don't enjoy it, and it's not the best use of the company's resource. And so the automation is really what will drive just a good outcome on both sides. It's great for both parties. And so I think as you think about automating, the natural thing is, all right, what are some of the challenges that we're likely to face when automating? And we'll get into those in the next slide. So we talked a little bit about in the last discussion around, you heard me talk about getting data organized, having that your forecasting automation downstream is only as good as the data. And I think that's also one of the big challenges, right? A lot of companies have hundreds of SaaS tools. We're living in a world where technology is abundant, and every day there's a new SaaS tool that's solving a very pointed need, and it just creates lots of data all over the organization. And so it becomes hard for that finance team who wants all that data to be able to drive insight and actions. Some of us are lucky and we have data teams, we have data engineers who are creating pipelines, who are extracting it from all the systems, loading it, and then transforming it into a central place, into some sort of tool like maybe like Causal, where you're able to really draw insights and then forecast. But the issue is that that's a large process, and that's not something that only finance can control. And so it really comes down to being able to collaborate, and data engineers have tons of requests. They're getting asked for things all the time. And so getting them to step in here and help can often be a challenge. The second point is that when you set up a new tool, when you buy a new software, you're really excited. It's like when you buy a new car, you're super excited, you want to go drive it, you want to go show all the new features to people. It's the same thing when you buy a new software. And so, or when you're looking to put new tools in place, maybe there's multiple tools in this automation stack. And so defining the scope and not biting off more than you can chew. I think at Causal, we sometimes have talked to folks that have learned that, hey, this is the ideal state of the world at our company, and this is where we are today. And there's a huge delta between the two. And what ends up happening is that they try to get to that ideal end state too quickly. They're unrealistic with timelines. They're unrealistic about who can do what and what resources to bring in. And so I think when you're automating, it's really, really important to think about staging it. defining the scope of what you can do in each phase, setting out different projects, and as you heard Kevin and Brady say, it's really finding low-hanging fruit and then working your way up. But this is not, automation is definitely in the finance realm and across a company is not an overnight thing. And then lastly, I think like any new process, automation requires change management. You are going to have to talk to your CEO or maybe your CMO and the head of a department who's used to receiving a output of what you've been doing currently in a certain format that they like, and they may not really either appreciate and or acknowledge the amount of manual effort they have to do to put in maybe a dashboard together or maybe a couple of slides. Or maybe it's the board, right? Maybe the board is used to receiving things in a certain way, which is just not efficient for you to do. It's not a good use of your time. And so as you're automating things, you have to think about downstream, how can I make sure that I'm delivering the value and the outputs to the downstream stakeholders that they're used to seeing, that they want to see, and kind of incorporating that into your process and thinking about who the downstream people that are going to benefit from this, not only just from me as like the person who's getting time back, who can be that strategic finance partner to the business, but also the people that, how does it affect what other people can do with their job? We often see people at Causal, we'll hear from Brady a bit more about Branch, but Branch is a perfect example where they took their automation to the next level. They have all different departments pushing Causal downstream and working in tandem with sales, with claims. And so it really, they approach it in the right way, and they've rolled it out in a way that they have driven more value for the end user. And so on the last side, like, what does the ideal state of automation look like? So it starts with the integration, and I think the ideal state that we see here, integrated, agile, analytical, they all build on each other. So we saw a lot of people have started making the progress towards integrations. That is the automated reporting, the ability to easily connect into your data sources, draw the data out in a quick way. And there's a lot of work that goes into that. There's a lot of data modeling. There's a lot of working with people that own the different systems and are inputting in and making sure that they're tracking things the right way. But once you have that integrated part of the automation process set up, it then allows you to be agile. It then allows you to respond to different market conditions. I mean, we all are going through right now a kind of, like I said, overnight change in the market conditions of the VC world, just the overall macro market, and we have to be agile. A lot of people are looking at their business model and they're making changes. And when you have this automation in your stack, you're then able to quickly respond and come up with new scenarios in days, not weeks or months. And so from being integrated to being agile, the last thing is just being analytical. So kind of furthering on my last point, we see a lot of people as they automate, it allows the FP&A professional to just be a lot more strategic. No longer is FP&A just looking at financial statements or AR, how quickly we collected revenue or how quickly we paid our bills. They're now starting to combine operational data into things. So how can we tie things in the P&L or any of the financial statements to operational data? And again, we'll hear from Brady at Branch. I'm quite familiar with his business model, and there's a lot of data that goes into the insurance space and a lot of e-commerce businesses that have lots of products, lots of revenue streams, different marketing channels, and tying that all together to not only look at just the financial statements, but what's everything that happens before you get to the financial statements. And automation really sets the FP&A and the finance team up to be able to drive those insights and help the broader business. And candidly, everyone enjoys their job a bit more when the stuff's automated and they're not sending around manual CSVs. Thank you. Back to you, Olga.
Thank you, Chris, for all of your insights and, well, actually bringing this process of automation closer to us. What we will do now, we'll actually jump right away to the practical case coming from a very small company, which is actually very closely connected to what Chris was talking about. So now we'll hear Brady Ellis speaking about finance automation to manifest the mission. Brady, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Olga. So excited to get to share a little bit about Branch's story. We were founded just a few years ago and generated our first revenue dollar in the summer of 2019. So a very, very young company. When I joined the team just about 2 years ago as the first person in finance, accounting, or even like data analysis, we were just a team of 30, and we've since then grown to be a quite substantially large, quickly growing startup firm in the insurtech space. But we're driven by this mission that's underlying every single thing that we do. And every person at Branch, hopefully, when you ask what the mission is, it's to make insurance less expensive so more people can become insured. It's motivating. We actually have it built into who we are legally. We're a Delaware Public Benefits Corporation committed to providing people with more access to insurance coverage that's affordable. To do this, a lot of what we need to believe in our finance team is that we can run more efficiently and drive more value with the amount of money that we're given to spend on different things like headcount and consulting resources, and just generally providing a good product to the rest of our company. Not to mention, insurance is by far one of the most complicated industries in the United States, and definitely around the world as well. Thinking about the different risk segmentation and where we're actively selling policies and how we acquire our business and all of these different complex things that we're thinking about, the FP&A team can step in to provide clarity and insight and data to make everyone feel more confident about what they're doing. And that's what we're on the mission to do, to make insurance less expensive by helping the rest of our operating team run more efficiently and effectively while we run efficiently and effectively. So if you look to the next slide, talk a little bit about how we did it and what we're still on the path towards doing. We started with our data, and keeping in mind that this is a really small team. We actually really kicked off our finance team, our FP&A function, just about a year ago. And so for those 25% of people who said, well, we don't really have automation built in, you can definitely see how different sizes of companies have different resources. And I get to speak from the side of, we didn't have a ton of resources going into this right off the bat. We started with just one employee and an intern and a really dedicated group, excited to invest into building automations, building ways for us to bring in data and put it out the other side. Now, the first step is, how do you get the data in one spot? And so we worked with our CTO to develop this data lake, which we have a cloud server data lake that brings in all sorts of different data points, stuff from our accounting GL, our HR information system, just random manual CSVs that we upload every once in a while, because bit by bit, you start with something manual and can move to automated a lot easier if you know how to do it manual first. And then we have stuff from our own internal product systems, how we sell our business every day. That's not just financial data, it's our operational data. How do we work together? And what we did is we started to empower people with access to this wealth of information to say, how are you going to take all this information and project the future of our business in our FP&A tool? If you jump into the next slide a little on how we went through those steps, we started with getting our data environment set up. Do we know how the data is connected? Can we work with our engineering team, our IT team, to make sure we know what's going on? A great example that I'll talk a little bit about through this process is our sales team. They were a mighty team of 3 when I first joined, and now are a much larger team as well. And they were on the phones working with our customers, talking about coverage, making sure that they got a great insurance policy for their home and auto. And we needed to get them information on how they're running efficiently and how well they're doing at selling policies. Also, how many people we need on that team to project into the future to get a capacity plan built in a way that's automated and supportive. But first we had to figure out where the data is. So we looked and we pulled from our HR information system on, how many staff do we have and in what roles are they? We went and pulled from our accounting system on their sales productivity and the total payroll costs and all those different other pieces. And then we went and pulled from our phone telephony program. How many calls are they making? How many sales on those calls are they making? All these like non-financial data elements. And we put it all into a data lake to summarize all in one spot. We then got our accounting team on the phone. We said, hey, we need to understand this data better. How can we support you in what you're trying to build and do? And they got into the data environment with us. Everyone on Branch's accounting and finance team gets trained in standard SQL, which is just a really basic query language that allows you to work with large structured databases. It stands for structured query language. And we gave everyone the training to be able to dive in and understand our database as well, and the most basic, like easy online trainings that anyone can have access to. And now everyone from an intern through to myself has the ability to go in and build models themselves straight out of our data environment, including our accounting team. And then we empowered all of our finance professionals to dig into that extra data layer and figure out how to plug it into our data tool that we use, which is Causal, as Chris mentioned, is a data tool that we've been really successful in navigating. If you jump into the next slide, you can kind of see a little bit and hear about where we're at. We've, in the last year, automated almost all of our P&L and significant portions of our balance sheet, seeing how can we look at the data that's in our environment, structure it in a way that makes sense, and then plug it into our tools to be able to see what does the future look like. Scenario modeling is now more accessible, where we're able to look at the changes that we might be seeing in our environment. For our sales team, if we're expecting different changes, different headwinds in the industry based on inflation that many of us are experiencing today, or other different issues that we're seeing in the environment, we're able to pivot quickly and jump into, okay, let's look at this new scenario and how the different data we're seeing is going to work. Without these automations, that would be days of work. And instead, our finance manager is able to dive right in with a couple notes from different executives on our team and say, I think I know where to start. Like, let's start poking around and seeing what we can find out from our different scenarios. And we have now a fully functioning 1 year and 5 year strategic plan that's built off of assumptions that we can constantly monitor and align around, but that gets better and better every single day by feeding it more and more of the data environment that we're building. As you can tell, that was a lot of people. That wasn't just FP&A. There's a lot of people involved from our finance team, from our accounting team, from our technology team. But in the end, having everyone on the same page together to help support our operational spaces, like our sales leader, has been a phenomenal benefit to our business. We've already seen different ways where we've been able to find new efficiency and new ways to reduce cost or to invest more in a space that's generating more results overnight, because we have everything at our fingertips to be able to learn more about our business as we're moving. And with that, I think I'll turn it back to you, Olga, for us to dive into the next step.
Thank you so much, Brady, for your insightful presentation. And thank you, my dear audience, for sending in all these questions. If you still have questions to our speakers, you certainly have time to ask them through Q&A box. And now it's actually time for me to ask you a question. Brady has mentioned several times the size of the team. So I'm really interested to know how automation has affected your team size. Has it? Let me launch this polling question. And what I want to ask you is, how has your FP&A team size changed after introducing automation? It has increased, decreased, or hasn't changed? I'm very curious to see the results. Has your team increased after introducing some automation, or decreased, or hasn't changed at all? Let's see, how do we stand in terms of team sizes? And most of you have already voted, so it's time for me to actually close this poll and let's see the results. I see that most of the cases, in 63%, the size of the team hasn't changed after introducing some automation. And almost even in 20% of cases, the team has decreased. In 18% of cases, it has even increased. Brady, what do you think? Are you surprised by the poll results?
I'm surprised to see how many people are in the space of hasn't changed. I know, for speaking from Branch's experience, we've increased significantly our investment in our finance FP&A team after investing in these automations, because our employees are able to work more on the critical thinking, investigative, and analytics work, and a little bit less on the process-oriented pieces. So we've definitely increased the number of staff, but increased tenfold the scope of impact we've been able to have. Though I can understand as well, decreased or hasn't changed because of the different efficiency you gain. It's also a hard market to continue to bring in finance people. And I know from a Branch perspective, we've been able to recruit some fantastic folks, but from the opportunity to work in these automated finance environments. So I'm hope that others are able to get that benefit as well as they continue to install automations.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you, Brady, for this answer. And it's time for us to move on to our short discussion. So let me invite all of you to join me here on the webcam. And the question I want to ask you is actually related to the polling question. How can we make sure that we actually reinvest time saved by automation into high value activities? And let me start with you, Kevin. What do you think? How can we make sure that we reinvest this time?
So I think it starts with having some sort of North Star. So why automate? I think this is, just to touch on some of the discussions Chris had at the start, and myself, and I think Brady also touched on it. There needs to be a North Star that drives the organization. And so we've already, ideally, there's already been an identification of what these high value activities are. And we're transitioning with educating people and moving them up that value chain. That would be my answer. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for your answer, Kevin. And let me move on to you, Chris. What do you think? How we can make sure that we take this time saved by automation and actually use it on value-adding activities?
Yeah, I think I'm a big person of measuring success and tracking, and I think that this is a very measurable thing, right? We can look at our time, we can look at where we're spending our time, and maybe we're not downloading all these CSVs and transforming them and then sending out to department heads. Like, that's very measurable. You can clearly see that that's no longer happening. And I think somewhat related, another interesting point that would really make it clear that you're doing a lot more value-added activities is if you find yourself having conversations with department heads or business leaders, and they're driving a lot of the conversation because they have the data at their fingertips. They are informing it rather than you providing them the information and them asking you to do it. And there's just a lot of less back and forth and more of spending time with business partners, collaborating on how to drive the business forward, and less time doing a lot of the admin back and forth of sharing data.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And back to you, Brady. What do you think? How can we reinvest this time saved into value-added activities?
Yeah, I have to say that automation gives you an opportunity to invest into more activities. And there's definitely been times on our team where we're working down a pathway and get distracted from the end goal and how our operator needs our support to appear for them. And so being close with the operator that you're supporting the whole way through, but still skeptical, like still thinking, I know that there's more value we can be adding here. Where can we add a new perspective, bring in a new amount of data or cross-functional vision to the operator to help them to grow? When you have those open dialogues, that's when you end up being the most successful.
Nice. Thank you for all of your angles and all of your answers. And let's move on to a special section we have, key takeaways. What I would like to ask you now is to summarize the key idea for you from the whole webinar in 1 or 2 sentences. So literally 30 seconds takeaway. And let me start this time with you, Chris. What is the key idea of the whole event for you?
Sorry about that. Still getting used to mute in this world, even though we spend most of our time on camera. I think for me, a big shock was actually the percent of people that feel like their forecasting and scenario modeling is automated. That is in correlation to the amount of people that have integrations and have their reporting and dashboards automated. It feels like a natural next step is to work on the forecasting. I think so. It seems like people are making the step in the right direction of starting with the data, as I talked about earlier, and working to get there. But now I think it'll be interesting to see. We'll love to see that same question maybe in a future webinar, maybe next year, to see how much if people are now doing more forecasting and modeling in an automated way.
It's nice observation, Chris. Thank you for that. Moving to you, Brady. What is a key takeaway for you from the whole event?
I think my biggest takeaway is you can do this at any size, and to start with something small that generates value fast with a partnership from your operator, and then just invest a little bit of time into it. Scaling up any part of your workforce to make this happen on your finance team, not only is a good investment in them as employees on your team, but also into your business as a whole.
Great. And back to you, Kevin. What is a key takeaway for you?
Yes, I think two things for me. The first one is really reiterating what Brady said. Anyone can go on this journey. If you're at X billion, if you're at a couple of million, anyone can go on this journey. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing for me is I think the approach matters. Getting sponsorship, getting alignment at the executive level on what it is we're going to achieve is also super important. Just keep focus on the initiative.
Great, great. Thank you for all your answers. And I'm actually very excited to move on and start answering questions from the audience. I hope that we can answer at least some of them. And I will start from you, Brady. I have a question addressed specifically to you, quite a tricky one. I'm curious to hear your answer as well. What is the source of inputs you use to forecast strategic plans? The data usually is not easily available. So please elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think I changed my mind on how to best do this on a weekly basis. The strategic plans is really, it's driven from your CEO. And I'm really thankful that our CEO believes in what our finance team does and how we're working in finance automation. And so our inputs are a lot around what is it that we're investing into our business in the next year, and where do we think it's going to go? And so for Branch, we expect to be one of the largest and have a full footprint, best providers of home and auto insurance in the United States. How are we making steps along that strategic plan, and at which points are we going to fulfill more of that plan into the rest of our financials? And so that's really the starting point. Starts with our plan letter, what our CEO has set us out to do for the year and the next 5, and then we fold those inputs and expectations with our business leaders into our plan.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for your answer. And let me move on to you, Chris. From your experience working with many different clients, what do you see are the main impediments to automating forecasting? Main barriers to automating forecasting? What do you think?
I think it's probably deciding the logic. I think as you heard from Brady, it's like it is hard. Like your business is always changing, especially if you're at a stage like Branch where you're growing rapidly. Every day you're changing how it works. You're experimenting on things. Your inputs are always changing, and so I think what we see often across a lot of our customers is that sometimes you might start overthinking what that first input is because it's just hard. You know things are going to change. And so I think what I would say is that being able to understand that something's going to change, and more about think about your forecasting from I'm going to change this, but this is what we're going to start with, rather than this is what I'm going to lock myself into. I think a lot of people are like, oh, I'm building my model, I'm bored of building my forecast, I'm trying to automate it. So what I do now is going to be what I'm going to do for the next 3 years. But that's not the case. When you have the right tool set and the right data, you can be changing on a weekly basis.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you for this perspective. And moving to you, Kevi, more philosophical or cultural question to you. You have actually mentioned that we should start from the top, and support from executives really matters. So the question related to that is, what if the top does not recognize the urgency of the change? How to sell it to the CFO and other C-suite leaders effectively? What do you recommend?
So in my experience, at least, finance leaders want to be at the driving seat. They want to be, the CFO wants to be influencing business outcomes. And the CFO's primary mandate is, how do I influence the business with the knowledge within finance? Now, you go into this individual whose primary mandate is to influence the business and saying, hey, look, we can actually reduce the work the team is doing, provide capacity, and give the team more time to spend with business leaders. I'm yet to meet a CFO that says no to that. Now, cost can be a barrier, right? So this is where it becomes, trade-offs will need to be made. So the answer might be yes. However, the cost to do this is prohibitive. And what we've seen, without going into names, is there's several ways to do this. I talked about approaches differing. You could there are open source solutions. There are solutions that you could actually also build internally if cost is prohibitive. So there are mechanisms for you to be able to address those concerns, show a win, show a quick win, and then the floodgates typically will open to invest in your project. This is my experience. I think like typically CFOs want to move their finance teams up the value chain. And so just understand the key driver for your executive and narrate the story along those lines.
Right. Thank you for your advice. I think it's much deeper than just solving the automation problem. It's actually related to any change we want to introduce in our organizations. Okay, second round of questions. I hope that we'll have time for that. And question to you, Brady. If you have to go through the same journey all over again, what would you do differently?
Oh man, it's a nuanced question for sure. The journey that I think we would start earlier with having a finance focus. I think with our different varying stages of investment, we really only invested heavily into finance starting about a year ago. And man, do I wish that we had had more time and more energy knocking down the mountain of insights that we knew were out there that we just had to spend time to go chase down. And so that's probably, if I was to do it over again, I would invest a little bit more energy into our FP&A strategy first. I was focused entirely on accounting at my start here. But in general, like I'm really thankful we started early with a tool. That's, I think, and one that's flexible. I would highly recommend something that's going to work in a way that allows you to build it how you want. One that's going to be not keep you in a box of like how your industry should behave or how like generally finance planning should behave, but one that's driven based off of I want to look at my data and my finance data in this way.
Thank you. We'll hopefully we will learn from you and from your mistakes as well. Chris, question to you. You work with many organizations. Are there any types of companies you would not recommend automation to for any reason? So like saying automation is not for you. Are there such cases?
It's an interesting question. My natural response is no. I think that there probably maybe a different way to answer that question is if you're looking to automate, you have to look at your team. I think that it depends on like the team that you have, the comfortness to have with new tools, the ability to learn new tech, and those sorts of things. And if you look across your finance team and that's not there, then it may be a consideration of like, all right, what is the lift? Because there's not only a lift to automate, but then there's also a lift to upskill the whole entire team. And so it really depends. Like, I think in that, with that even said, it's like pushing your team to say this is coming down and making them interested, getting them excited. And so I wouldn't say there's not a type of company that shouldn't automate. I would say it's more about deciding when and who the stakeholders and who do you have the right people on your team to make that automation successful.
Right. That's a valid point. Thank you for that, Chris. And question to you, Kevin. You mentioned at the beginning that you want to automate everything, or you believe that everything should be automated. And there is a tricky question. Do you think we really should automate everything, or classical Pareto ratio works here? So 80% of results can be achieved by 20% of the effort.
Yeah, so it's a good question. The 80-20 rule, I think works, and this really depends on where you are as an organization. We've spoken about firms that are just starting on the journey, and in that case, I definitely encourage maximizing impact. So starting on the journey, absolutely identify the highest value activities and drive those. I still believe in automating everything, because as I kind of refer back to something I said earlier on around a cultural approach to automation. Automating everything doesn't necessarily mean that we get to 100% automation, but it just drives a continuous improvement mindset. It drives a mindset where you have your eyes wide open, looking for opportunities where automation really can drive value. So I hope I haven't kind of argued against myself there, but I hope that, it's the point's clear.
Oh, I think you have made very clear case here, actually. And last question to all of you, and I ask you to answer just in one word. What do you think is a top skill we should develop in our FP&A teams to actually be ready for automation, or to be ready to deal with the results of automation? One key top skill we should develop in FP&A teams. And let me start again with you, Brady. What do you think?
Analytics.
Indeed, analytical skills certainly makes sense. Chris, what do you think? What is this one top skill?
SQL.
Great answer. Thank you, Chris. And Kevin, what's the top skill for you in terms of automation?
So I work in a company where everyone's an engineer. So unfortunately, I'm also going to have to say SQL because it really is the underpinning for how we extract data.
See, and it's eye-opener to us that actually many of us, even at senior positions, should start learning at some skills such as SQL to actually get better with data. Thank you for all these answers. Thank you for all these pieces of advice we have received from you. And what's left for us before we close our webinar tonight is actually, I would like to invite all of you to our next webinar happening on the 12th of July about the latest trends and developments in FP&A. So results of our global survey of 2022. I'm certain that you don't want to miss that. Another thank you to our technology partner for this evening, Causal, the business planning platform for finance and beyond. Thank you for making this event possible. And what I would like to ask all of you to join us, and please choose the way that works best for you. There are many ways to connect to our FP&A Trends global community. Before we actually say thank you to all panelists, I would like to ask all of you, don't turn your computer right away. Right after this webinar, there is a 30-second survey question asking for your feedback for this event. That's very important for us. Please do answer that. Now, the only thing left for me is to say thank you to all of our audience. Thank you for joining. Thank you for being here with us. Big thank you to all of our panelists for your insights, for your experience, for your answers to all our questions. Thank you. Thank you for being here with us. Have a good day. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your week. See you soon. Goodbye.